Thank you. I was telling Garrett that when I was doing the field research for this project, my car broke down in Madison for 4 days. So I wish I would have had that map while I was there. I don't think 2,000 miles of driving plus a heat dome were good for my car. I have been studying diaries and long collections of people's narratives and trying to understand how to put those onto maps. And I'd like to share a bit today that I've done with one diary. This is the Diary of Elisabeth Koren, which she maintained from 1853 to 1855. It was translated from the original Norwegian and published a long time ago. Just some context for this diary. Elizabeth was 21 years old when she moved from Norway to Washington Prairie, Iowa, in the northwest corner of the state. At that time, in the mid-19th century, many Norwegians were moving. The population in Norway was increasing. There were economic pressures that pressured that. At the same time, in the upper Midwest, the peoples who had been living on these lands had been brutally dispossessed of their lands, and many of them were forced to move during the Black Hawk War and later times. All of this was kind of happening together. Many Norwegians came in and settled in the northeastern part of Iowa and throughout Wisconsin. Many of them belonged to the Lutheran faith, and so they wrote to Norway requesting a pastor be sent to them. Wilhelm Koren had just graduated from seminary there in Norway, and he was headed for a fairly comfortable life there as in the clergy. But he decided to take this call and move to the United States. And Elizabeth accompanied him. Her diary is very well known in Norwegian American studies because it's very extensive and detailed, and also because it's one of the very few extensive diaries kept by Norwegian American women. When I read this diary, I was struck by the vivid associations of the landscape and emotion that she felt as she got used to her new home and attached meaning to it. And so I thought it'd be interesting to try to map in creative ways. At that time, I was reading a number of books that were inspiring, that provided ideas and also approached the narrative cartography from a critical bent. Cities Without Ground is a great book showing multiple levels of urban development in Hong Kong. I loved how it showed the temperature of the spaces that were air conditioned versus not. Also tried to portray sound and smells. Also, Dennis Wood's Narrative Atlas, Everything Sings, and Annette Mae Kim's Sidewalk City were providing me ideas of ways to see things that might go unseen. So mapping jack-o'-lanterns, or the pattern of light on the sidewalk, or the use of sidewalk space by vendors. These books called for maps that really reeked of a person or a place. At the same time, I was picking up ideas from feminist theory and thought in cartography and GIS and data visualization that I wanted to try to put in practice with this, that I felt were useful for thinking about narrative mapping. These include orienting the map view around the writer's conception of space and using microscale information about people's experiences from day to day and how space and gender and other things are produced together through routines and cycles. And also recognizing emotion and affect as legitimate ways of knowing and trying to use those in cartography and GIS. I don't consider myself an expert in feminist theory nor in artistic cartographic design, so I hope you'll be patient with me. I'm trying to learn about those things, and I found that NACIS is a great place to do that, so I enjoy this environment here. One of the things I wanted to try to do was to create a map that would show the view around Elizabeth's perception of space as she traveled in the new country for her. And as they were able to reach the state of Wisconsin through ships and rail travel, that was fairly straightforward. But then they had to cross most of Wisconsin in a wagon. And so that journey really caught my attention. I wanted to portray that wagon journey from her point of view, and I came up with kind of this strip map that goes from bottom to top, just showing how a person's journey is always moving forward rather than we don't walk sideways like this. We're always walking forward, so I wanted to show that way. And it was interesting that Carolyn showed Pierce's map of framing the days. I had this idea of wanting to also kind of mark the days in the diary, but I wanted to use the distance in the map in a different way. So instead of showing number of miles traveled or amount of time spent, I wanted to create the scale based on how much diary text was devoted to that particular day, thereby kind of zooming in on Elisabeth's feeling about the journey and what things stood out to her. So the map moves forward from bottom to top, sometimes showing little icons of things that they passed. These aren't real fancy. I just learned how to draw boxes in Inkscape like 6 weeks ago, so still learning here, but I feel it's never too late. Sometimes they traveled at night. I was experimenting with gradients to kind of show the progression into the dark, and sometimes they had to ask about the way because they were very primitive roads and they didn't know the direction to go. The most diary text was spent on December 19th. That described a harrowing crossing of the Wisconsin River where they actually had to get onto the ice and pull their stuff out on there and then put it in a canoe and cross the river. So in this map, the Wisconsin River is actually wider than the Mississippi because that crossing of the Mississippi was less dramatic. It was all frozen over so you could just walk across. Some of these hand-sketched images from the diary papers in the Luther College archives show their journey across the river and arriving in Iowa. Another thing I wanted to try to do is use microscale information and show the experiences, and I wanted to do this kind of showing the use of domestic space, which I thought was really interesting. This diary is fascinating because it gives a window into the routines of women and children in this society that's not often gotten from the life writings in Norwegian American literature. The people that called the Korens to Iowa were supposed to provide a house for the pastor and his wife to live in, and that wasn't built yet, so they had to live with other families in these little cabins based on their generosity to let them stay together. That was a pretty cramped environment. This cabin belonged to Eric and Helene Egge, who were the first ones to let them stay with them. It's been preserved on the grounds of the Vesterheim Museum in Decorah, Iowa, just the way that it was described in the diary. The cabin is 16 feet wide by 14 feet long, and this was housing 4 adults and 2 children at that time. There's another bed on the right-hand side that you can't see, but you get a feel for the amount of privacy that was there in this cabin. The Korens had been married for 3 weeks, and they got to share their new marriage with everybody there, I guess. I wanted to play around with seeing if I can map this space. They did a nice job of laying this out exactly how it's described in the text. So using my newfound ability to draw boxes in Inkscape, I was trying to kind of create a layout that would show some of the domestic scenes in the diary and then accompany that with the text, as I like in Pierce's example how she includes the text next to the map. And so even if you can't tell what's going on the left-hand side, you can read the diary on the right. This one is a kind of a cozier domestic scene where a lot of them are around the fire, thinking about their old homeland, but also trying to get some work done. In other cases, though, especially in the middle of the winter, this was not a real pleasant space to be in as it was so cramped. This map tries to show some of the unpleasant smell of fried pork, the roasting of coffee, Helene's coughing, the noise of the children, and then finally Eric's bad tobacco, all of which made the room disagreeable to me. The map looks a little chaotic, but it's supposed to portray some of that discomfort that was felt in different ways, as well as some of the sounds and smells that were occurring. Also wanted to show how the space was used in different ways. Helene was, one thing I noticed over time in these maps is that Helene, the wife of the couple that owned this cabin, was always either at the stove or washing the floor. And Elisabeth, being from kind of a higher social status in Norway, would not have been expected as a pastor's wife to be scrubbing floors. So she was often sitting there working in the diary while Helene was doing the work. Sometimes Elisabeth did help with childcare. In this case, the little children were taking chips from the stove and throwing them in the face of a cow that was trying to get into the house. In this one, Elisabeth and Wilhelm, her husband, are trying to enjoy some moments of private flirtation after the rest of the family has gone to bed by passing notes and pantomime and other things. So at this scale, it was interesting to see how the domestic space was used, and I wanted to provide some visual to that. The final approach I wanted to take was trying to convey emotions and sensory experiences and figure out how to map and portray that. And one thing that really stuck out to me as I focused on the routines and cycles in this diary was how much Elisabeth walked. In order to get out of the house that was so cramped, she would often take walks. These served all kinds of functions. They helped with her mental health. They helped her establish relationships in the community. She walked to explore the new landscape as well as help her husband in his ministry. And so I wanted to see if I could map these and get a feel for her use of the space. I tried to immerse myself in this diary, read it, marked it up with pencil multiple times, but then worked on gathering both historical and modern day layers of information in a GIS, trying to see where the forest used to be or where the roads were. The locations of the different farms of the Norwegian settlers were fairly well known. Those are shown with black dots here in this map. And then every time there was a walk described in the diary text, I marked it and tried to digitize it, sometimes using a slope map to help me understand where the most likely routes would be. I also visited the site personally as well to kind of get a feel for what it looks like today. So on the left is a map of the 82 walks in the diary that I was able to make guesswork at and digitize. Those are all overlaid with each other here on the left in kind of in the form we would see with the modern day activity tracking app like Strava or Gaia GPS. This was Elisabeth Koren's Strava in 1854, you could say. Some of that is estimation. I didn't always know the exact route that she took. But the density surface on the right, just created with a kernel density algorithm, provides a pretty good guess of kind of where she usually was. And I tried to experiment with showing the density as transparency and leaving the rest of the area on the periphery foggy to convey how she sort of discovered the landscape, perhaps, and was more familiar with some places than others. The diagram on the left shows some of the strong social networks that she developed with certain families in the neighborhood as she went there often. I also wanted to look at mapping emotions and feelings. So in addition to tracing the lines, I made a point data set of any kind of emotion that was felt, and then tried to do my own classification of whether that was a pleasant or unpleasant emotion. And then I ran density surfaces on those too to see if there were places that tended to be more positive or negative, and calculated the difference of those surfaces to find places that were generally more positive or more negative. Certainly the area around the parsonage that was eventually constructed was a happy one for her. She liked to dream of her future there, and it's also situated in a very beautiful place with a big view. Other places around the neighborhood were less pleasant, with irrepressible dogs, cattle, her being impatient and tired with her husband as they went together. Other times she was glad to be with him and be alone. So there are ups and downs of life portrayed here. I also marked any time there was a sense of sight, sound, touch, taste, or smell that occurred on these walks, and I found plenty of them going through related to both the natural landscape as well as the human landscape. So there were men shouting at the oxen, the sound of her neighbor's axe cutting down trees, but also sights of deer and moonlight and other kinds of effects. She could feel her skirt wet from the grass. She could feel the hand of her little neighbor that she shared the cabin with as they walked together, and taste the strawberries in the late summertime. And then the smells included flowers. There was a rumor in Norway that the flowers in America didn't actually smell like anything, but she learned that that wasn't true. And as well as pancakes and bread that were coming out of the homes as she approached them. I have to end, I'm just about out of time, but there is a poster in the map gallery showing some of these maps here. I appreciate those who helped when I was doing on-site research, especially the Luther College archives, where I was able to take a look at the original diaries. And I recommend these references in feminist thought and cartography and GIS that have really been helpful in the way that I've wanted to approach these maps and just come up with ideas of new ways to portray the space. And appreciate your attention today.